Good morning, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. I'm Nivid Desai. I serve as the program executive for the writing studio at IIT Gandhinagar. And today I want to take you through three domains of communication and the impact that generative AI continues to have on all three of them. These three happen to be my area of work, both research as well as teaching. So I was interested when I got in touch with Rhea and Professor Mishra from Nirma University. We got to talk. I spoke with Professor Mishra about it at length. That the impact of generative AI on academic, technical, and creative communication is quite interesting to explore. So today I want to take you through the nuances of the first principles of why we use generative AI as an intermediary to communication. Then I want to take you through brief notes on all three types of communication: academic, technical, and creative. And then I'll take you through a tour of a module that I offer at IIT Gandhinagar as a demo of what it is like to actually integrate generative AI into writing and communication as a discipline. So to begin with, why Gen AI in communication? I firmly believe that unless and until the first principles of anything are firmly established, it does not get a robust discussion out of it, right? So first, let us establish the first principles. What AI in communication? What is the root of this kind of a marriage to work, right? So cognition births communication, as all of us are aware, right? Communication is nothing but an offloading of your cognition. Your thoughts turn into speech, your thoughts turn into words, and that is the first principle on which communication works. And in this model of cognition birthing communication, generative AI fits right in. You augment the former, you as the thinker augment the cognition, and generative AI augments the latter. It augments the communication. Where does that lead us? It leads us to our first principles. Complement, don't substitute, right? This is universal knowledge by now that we perceive AI as an assistant and a simplifier and an amplifier, sorry. So you complement your work with AI, you don't substitute it, right? It is not to replace authentic thinking, but to amplify it, to assist it. Then to iterate and refine. AI generated outputs, they often need some human intervention, some human oversight to ensure that they are up to the mark of what we actually need out of them, right? And then at the last, you should understand its strengths. It is excellent for brainstorming, excellent for drafting, excellent for summarizing, but it may be less effective for nuanced or critical judgment. And I'll ensure that all of these are addressed in the longer span of my lecture, uh, all three of them, to ensure that AI complements, to ensure that we iterate and refine our writing, and that we understand its strengths as a brainstorming co-pilot, much more effective in that capacity than just substituting our critical judgment and nuanced thinking, because it lacks the kind of efficiency at the present moment. So let me take you one by one through academic writing or academic communication, technical communication, and creative communication. First of all, I think most of us, having been part of academia, would have experimented somewhere or the other about how academic communication can be enhanced by generative AI, right? Just to take you a tour of all the common use cases, we use it as research assistance, right? It summarizes research papers for us, it finds relevant literature, it generates our research questions for us as well. It drafts. Now, in this case, I should be extremely clear that in this way, I do not mean writing on our behalf, right? Drafting does not mean writing the final output. Drafting means creating outlines, right? Organizing ideas. And for example, if you have a grand proposal and if you have a complex idea, a dense one in front of you, it can slot information quite efficiently, right? What should go at the top? What should go in the middle of the argument? What should be a nice conclusion? It is a great sorting mechanism. You can rely on AI to have the sorting capacity of a complex, dense academic idea. And at the end, it does the hygiene really well, right? Polishing to improve the grammar, the style, and the flow in academic essays. Now, for all of us, we would know that each different discipline would have different implications as far as their formats and conventions are concerned. So we can train customized AI models to ensure that they contain the kind of formats, the kind of macros, the kind of conventions that are native to our discipline, the one that we regularly write in. So, in all of this, I believe most of us would have used generative AI in some or the other capacities to enhance our academic communication. In fact, when I was researching for this lecture, I came across a nice six-pointer list, right? That a paper quotes that overall they have found generative AI, especially ChatGPT, to be very efficient in enhancing academic communication in six particular areas. Let me show them to you. First of all, idea generation. Now, in this case, I do not mean that it thinks on your behalf, right? You must first identify the area broadly in which you have to do your research. Then it helps you identify the gaps. It helps you, it surveys the literature for you, and it helps you identify the gaps that are worth filling. Then, like I said, content structuring, right? Every single academic paper, every single academic report works at a structural level. It is logically organized in a way that the information flows through in a conventional, strictly structural sense. So for content structuring, you can check whether a certain idea belongs to introduction, a certain idea belongs to the methodology part, right? Accordingly, you can use AI to slot a good part of your information. Then comes literature synthesis, right? Which papers are agreeing with which ones, which papers are disagreeing with which ones. All of that can be brought in with a good amount of literature synthesis and AI's use case in it. Next comes data management. Let's say you are doing some quantitative research, right? In that case, any kind of data, any kind of input that you arrive at a raw data set, if you need to polish it, if you need to refine it, customized AI models can be built, customized generative AI can be built so that a good chunk of data management can be taken care of by such models. Then comes, like I said, hygiene, right? Hygiene, pure polishing of writing. This is the editing part where your grammar, your punctuation, your paragraphing, all of this can be taken care of by an AI model. And at the end, ethical compliance. Whether you are sticking by the plagiarism measures that are required out of your academic publication or your project, that is something which is a 1-0. It's a binary, right? It's either correct or incorrect. So from what I have experienced from the research that I have read and I've done, AI works much better in binary measures, right? When there is something that is either correct or incorrect, if you know that there is one conventional structural way that to do it correctly, you can rely on AI much better over there. This is the source for this six-pointer list, and it is quite insightful. If anybody wants to look into it, I would genuinely recommend it. Now, I would like to give you an example of what I did for this lecture, right? As far as academic communication is possible, I don't want to just restrict it to research paper writing. I know that that is the champion for all of us. That one task is the central focus of academic communication for a lot of us, but I don't want to restrict it to just that. So let me give you a glimpse of what I tried with ChatGPT. Okay, this is my brief that I sent to Ria when I first introduced the topic of my talk. Take a moment, read through this. Okay, this is a draft that I have written. This is a draft that lays out the entire thesis of this talk in a paragraph format. However, it is not accessible. It's a dense block of text, right? Now, if I want to see what are the key insights that are inherent within my argument, I'm making an argument, I'm making a case, I'm making a demonstration. In all of that, which are the arguments that are inherent to this that I would be able to deliver as a key insight at the end of this lecture? I wanted to check that out so that I can reverse engineer my entire lecture to be insightful, right? To be in such a way that there is some takeaway at the end of it. So I wrote this entire paragraph as a brief of my lecture to Ria. And when I entered it into ChatGPT, I asked it to give me two clear insights from this bunch of text, right? Now, of course, I knew that I had some substance to say, so there would be some insight in there, but ChatGPT clarified my thinking for me. it brought about two key insights for this lecture. The first one was the integration of AI in writing, or writing happens to be my specialization. Therefore, I use writing over here. The integration of AI in writing and communication. So, understanding how generative AI and large language models can assist in the writing process across different disciplines. And the second one, of course, is pedagogical approaches, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. The strategies for incorporating AI tools into teaching methods to enhance learning outcomes in writing and communication. These are the two key insights that an AI model threw back at me. That if I want to optimize my lecture to be insightful, so to say, I must focus on these 2 points. So then it was clearer to me that I could reverse engineer my entire lecture to ensure that each slide, each point that I'm making is actually tying back to either of these two insights. So either I'm talking about the principles of integrating AI in communication, or I'm talking about the pedagogical approaches. So it actually gave me a well-rounded structure of the way that I was going to talk to all of you. So this is also a way that you can structure your academic thought. I know that as academics, dense methods, but if you want to simplify it back to you so that it makes better structural sense, AI can also do that pretty efficiently. I want to now take you to technical writing, right? Streamlining technical communication. I happen to teach a couple of technical courses at advanced levels at IIT Gandhinagar. We have executive master's programs. One that I've taught was in energy policy and regulation. The other that I'm teaching currently is data science for decision making. The first one was hosted by the Electrical Engineering Department. The second one currently is being hosted by the Computer Science and Engineering Department. For both of them, I teach a writing course that is custom made to suit the discipline's particular requirements. In both of them, I've tried to do some tinkering with technical communication. So I'd like to brief you about it a little bit, right? AI can actually help my students do code documentation. It helps them generate clear, structured documentation from the comments that they receive, right? Feedback, reviews, and comments that they receive from their colleagues can all be streamlined into a structured code documentation. I often ask them, what will you do if you encounter somebody who is from a non-technical audience? They are from a professional domain, so they often think that they almost always have to deal with a technical audience, but I have to remind them time and time again that in the professional world, much of what we talk about is to a non-technical audience. So an exercise I often ask them is explain a complex algorithm in layman's terms. There's a wonderful video that I would actually direct you towards. Harvard's Professor David J. Malin, who is an instructor for CS50, the most world-renowned course in computers, he has an entire video explaining algorithms to different age groups. Right? It's pretty inspiring, and this actually helps you understand the way that a first principles approach can be aided by generative AI. Right? So if you have a complex understanding at an expert technical proficiency level, AI can break it down to levels where you can explain it in layman's terms with analogies, with examples, with metaphors, so that your knowledge becomes accessible to a wider range of people, of general people and professionals. Next up, technical reports. They have to write technical reports as a professional compulsion. So AI can help them draft clear, concise, and formatted reports. There's a wonderful thing called executive summary that my students actually taught me about. And I got to learn about how executive summaries can help policymakers, decision makers, C-suite executives to make well-rounded policy decisions about the research that they have done or the algorithms that they have built. In all of this, AI has been revolutionary because the dense algorithms that my students have built can be quickly summarized into an executive report and offered to the people who actually have to make a decision based on that algorithm. Like I said, the second course that I'm teaching currently is called Data Science for Decision Making. So it is not just a pure data analytics course, but it is an applied course where writing plays a role in clarifying the critical thinking. And AI is an enhancer, it is an enabler in that sense. An example that I would like to offer you is summarizing system performance metrics. Some of my students are working with e-commerce companies. Some of them are working with cybersecurity companies. In both of these cases, they have to ensure that the system performance is robust. In the first case, to deliver to the customers. In the second case, to protect the integrity of the system that they are working on. In both of the cases, if they want to communicate the robustness of their system to their audience, AI can be pretty useful in ensuring that their communication is as clear as possible. Third one is the creative communication, right? We have spoken about academic, we've spoken about technical. Both of them were fairly objective, they were fairly formal. There were conventions in place, there were disciplines in place, people knew how to get stuff done. There was only one or maybe a couple of ways to make it correctly. But now we are entering a slightly murky area, right? Creative communication is my favorite domain to talk about. As a student of literature, as an academic policymaker of literature, this is where I like things getting interesting. So let's first talk about story and script writing, right? Generative AI, as is known, it sparks ideas or co-writes plots. A lot of creative writers were the first to raise an alarm against generative AI, saying this is going to be a serious threat to creative writers, and I am going to address that in a short span of time. But within the scope of elevating creative communication, this is a capacity that AI has fairly performed well on. For example, to generate prompts for a novel's opening scene, right? The first scene of a novel can always be a little tricky to crack. It has to hook the readers, it has to generate curiosity. So, to generate a prompt for the first scene of a novel, AI can be a good example where you give it the summary of the story and you ask it to throw the reader in the middle of tension, right? There is a beautiful phrase that I learned from my Shakespearean criticism classes in literature called in media res, in the middle of a conversation. So if AI can suggest something like that, it can actually open a novel in a much more impactful manner. Second one would be marketing copy, right? To craft compelling ad headlines. This is for the marketing people. To craft compelling ad headlines and social media posts. Like I said, this is also fairly conventional. However, it can be experimented with as much creativity as possible. For example, designing a tagline for a product. If you describe what the product is, and if you describe what the target audience for that product is, it can come up with different levels of proficiency, different levels of complexity, and attractiveness in terms of tagline. So AI can be fairly functional within these modes of creative communication. However, when I talk to my students about AI's role in enhancing creative communication, it's a bait, to be very honest, because I want to see. I have AI majors in my class as well. My institute recently began an AI major, which is a 4 years flagship program in BTech in artificial intelligence. So I often talk to them about AI's capacity of enhancing creative communication. And that conversation is a bait because it comes up with a few obvious questions, right? First of all, isn't creativity subjective? Second, what about my personal expression? How would I know if I have a voice? What happens to my individuality? Will this count as plagiarism? Right? If I outsource my output, my production to AI, no matter how creative it is, will this count as plagiarism? And lastly, it leads to an existential query, right? What if I stop thinking by myself? What if all of this hooks me onto a pattern where I solely depend on AI to even generate my own creative work? And these are questions worth asking. I love it when students come up with these questions and turn it into a discussion. It eventually leads to a point of no return, as we call it in narrative theory, right? Shall we stop using generative AI? Of course not. It is here to stay. It is here to make a presence felt amongst everybody, amongst learning practitioners and writers. So let's see what we can do with it. I want to now present a module that I've run with the graduate class at IIT Gandhinagar, both for masters and PhD students. And that has a pretty provocative title. Stay with me for a moment. The title is called Writing Against Generative AI. This is a model that I've borrowed from the University of Mississippi. And it's a pretty interesting model. I'd like you to engage with it. I'd like to introduce you to it. Let's see. In Ghosts, Ghost is an essay, right? In Ghosts, essayist Vohini Vara writes about her use of ChatGPT to help write an essay about her sister's death. This author was dealing with grief, and she had no words to express what the grief felt like. She had no words to express exactly how to put her grief into a manifested form. So what she did was to compose the essay. Vara worked with the generator, offering a piece of writing, prompting ChatGPT to generate content that could plausibly follow it, and then using the response to reclaim her story and motivate her to explore the experience in greater depth. Fundamentally, she wrote one line, asked ChatGPT to complete one paragraph, rejected that paragraph, and wrote a better line. This is how you write against generative AI. You retain the creative control, the autonomy, the agency in your critical thinking and creative thinking, right? So here's what I ask my students to do. In the chat box, you can compose an essay that begins with the following and write one or two sentences of your own creation. Then read what ChatGPT creates, consider it, and then delete it. Because then you begin again. Each time writing your human created sentences after the prompt. So the prompt that you have created will generate one paragraph generated by AI. You delete it, you see you the prompt. They start enriching. Hello?
Hi, Nivid. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
You are breaking up a little bit. My suggestion is maybe turn off your camera. We'll see if that improves anything.
All right.
There
Sure,
might be
for
a
sure.
bandwidth on your side.
For sure, no problem. No problem.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's try that. Please continue.
Okay. So then you begin again. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
We can hear you. We can hear you almost always. It's just you were
Yeah,
breaking
all
up a
right.
little
Thank
bit.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So then you begin again. Each time you write a human created sentence after the prompt that you originally wrote. Each new sentence brings more humanity, so to say, into your writing. And then you may find some of what ChatGPT writes inspiring. That's fine. It offers an idea that you hadn't considered. That's okay. It's not letting AI take over your own thinking capacity, your own creative faculties. That's completely justified. But you should keep notes about those findings in a separate sheet and document and refer to them as you construct your piece forward, right? Notice the convergences and divergences. This is how we use generative AI as a collaborative tool in creative communication to ensure that our entire nexus of critical thinking and creative thinking is maintained, it is retained, and we ensure that our autonomy, our agency, our genuine creative voice is not sacrificed, right? Here's a couple of prompts that I ask my students to try. Addressing the global disparity in cancer care necessitates the development of rapid and affordable nucleic acid testing technologies. This is from an actual cancer studies research paper, and this is for the academic kind, right? Anybody wants to pick up an academic prompt and they can write against generative AI based on this prompt. The other one was a narrative prompt, right? I was motivated to explore adaptive user interfaces after witnessing my visually impaired brother struggle while navigating digital technologies. This is more like a statement of purpose, right? An SOP. This is that tone of personal narrative. And then came autobiographical fiction, right? I saw my father after finishing my 4-year prison sentence. This is the beginning of a story. In all three of these cases, students picked up this sentence, asked ChatGPT to create one paragraph, deleted the paragraph, and wrote the sentence that fit more in their own imagination of what they wanted to say. Of course, they were asked to also experiment with other prompts, right? Other sentences that they would like to experiment by themselves. But this was the beginning. This was the origin of how you start writing against generative AI, right? With the resultant paragraph, you start to begin writing against the AI. You resist the mechanization, you resist the kind of uh, the kind of complaints that comes up with AI generated text, right? It is too robotic, it is lack of human values, it does not have the kind of tone and warmth and personality that my writing and my communication would have. Here's a solution for that. You write against generative AI. It's good practice to also sharpen the way that you think, sharpen the way that your creative expression takes place. At the end, as a literature student, I could not help but introduce you to a few reflective questions, right? At the end of all of this, for us literature students, things have to mean something, right? Things have to have a broader meaning. So I also offered a few reflective questions to my students. What do you embrace about what ChatGPT offers? Is there something that you actually accept from what ChatGPT has to give you? Then, what do you reject or what do you push against? Right? And do you feel yourself rooting for your own ideas against what ChatGPT is giving you? Do you feel yourself doggedly rooting for your own ideas? Why or why not? In the process of rejecting AI text, which is something that I encourage them to do, in the process of rejecting the AI text and rewriting your contribution, how do you distinguish your humanity? And this question, particularly, it brings about some of the most beautiful answers because it can come through your punctuations, it can come through the way that you separate paragraphs, it can come through your vocabulary, it can come through the level of proficiency of your language. It's a fantastic tool to assert your humanity in your own creative voice, right? So, AI's role in creative communication is not one of a hostile takeover. It is there to push you to think a little more ardently and a little more intently about what matters to you and what you embrace with what technology offers you. Like I said, at the end, I still have to offer something to you as a literature student. So here's a poem. Read with me. For a student who used AI to write a paper. Now I let it fall back in the grasses. I hear you. I know this life is hard now. I know your days are precious on this earth. But what are you trying to be free of? The living? The miraculous task of it? Love is for the ones who love the work. Love this line. Love is for the ones who love the work. So while talking about communication, while talking about writing, it naturally leads me to the next question. What is a communicator's work? What is it that we do when we call ourselves communicators, writers, critical thinkers, creative expressionists? What is it that we actually do? And I remember when I was trying to find a solution for this problem, I recently watched Top Gun Maverick, right? Tom Cruise says, don't think, just do. He offers this advice to Miles Teller, right? Don't think, just do. And I found that a communicator's work is the exact opposite. Don't just do, think. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nivid. We have some questions. I have some questions, and we can start a discussion. I think it's very
Sure,
interesting.
please.
Some new ideas for me, for sure, that I haven't been exposed to or thought of before. So we have a question from Familayo. What do you think are the detriments of uploading my writing or draft or concept to an AI tool for structuring, grammar editing, etc.? And I would add, also, how can we mitigate for those potential detriments in your view?
Sure, sure. So my basic problem with a lot of AI editing is that it tends to cater to an Americanized understanding of the English language. I often talk to a lot, I teach Indian students, and they use the English language fundamentally in a different way. Our rhythm of speaking, our rhythm of writing is quite different. So when a piece that they have written gets modified or refined by AI, I can almost see that. Because there's no way that they would use the word bunk bed, for example, right? We would call it something else, right? Because we in India, we don't have a common conception of a bunk bed, right? So if a bunk bed finds its way into a story, that's pretty damn sure that it is going to be an AI refined draft. So it takes away the finer nuances of language that are native to your use of the English language. That's one. The other is that sometimes it makes some pretty common mistakes. One of my most favorite examples is the recent mishap that happened with ChatGPT, where a lot of people started reporting that they would ask, uh, how many R's are there in strawberry? The word strawberry, right? And ChatGPT would assume an added context to it that we are necessarily asking about the last 2 R's. So ChatGPT would respond, the word strawberry has 2 R's, while in reality the word strawberry has 3 R's, right? So AI's understanding of some implied logic often does not work out in its grammatical editing patterns. So that's the long and short of it. There are a lot of different nuances that come up with editing and grammar and correction with AI, but my most common problem with it is that it homogenizes the English language to fit a fairly Americanized version of it.
So, Nivi, just to follow up on that for a sec. So, in terms of how do we mitigate for those things, your process, your method that you've introduced here, which is writing against generative AI, can help not to end up with that kind of output at the end, not that kind
Exactly.
of draft, right? I think that's very interesting. So, there's another question here
Exactly.
from Luca. Uh, what are your perspectives on the impact on academic publishing and peer reviewing long term? Do you think we will publish more or less shorter papers? Will AI do the reviewing? I find that reviewing today often feels very bot-like, checking for inconsistencies, etc., and I'm really missing the academic conversation in the peer reviewing process.
I agree. I completely resonate with that concern. Uh, when I receive reviews for my papers and my book chapters as well, it is often that I find it that they are pretty mechanical, right? Correct this mistake here, refine this vocabulary here. It's not about the deeper questions of what the research actually means or what the methodology employed wanted to say, right? In the midst of all of that, I believe that our knowledge will be more concentrated within the papers that we write. Currently, our papers are far more elaborate. They are sticking to conventions. There is a set method, there's a set rhythm, like I said. The information travels in a logical flow across the structure of a paper. But I see more and more academics resorting to, for example, I see so many academics resorting to a newsletter. It's pretty interesting, right? That their research papers will be pretty serious academic work, but if they want to reach out to a larger audience to see the kind of impact that their work is creating for the general people, they would resort to essays, newsletters, articles that are for public consumption, as against a specialized published manuscript which is peer reviewed. The peer review process has its own flaws, and we all would collectively agree that it is a misaligned incentive process. But we can get into that conversation later on. But I see that the writing and its form will evolve to concentrate the information and the insights into a much denser volume, right? The writing will be shortened, the writing will be more accessible, and it will ensure that people from across different levels of proficiency in English as well will be able to get on the same level and exchange ideas with the help of AI. For example, a lot of my students, when they come to my class, have the biggest fear because of the lack of English language proficiency. And I have to make them understand that the proficiency of a language has no bearing on how they can think a little more creatively and critically and independently. So I've often seen them use AI tools like Perplexity and ChatGPT and Gemini to enhance their verbal expression of the complex thoughts that they are having, independent of the language.
Mhm.
So at a parity level of proficiency, AI can actually do a lot of good in that direction.
So we will, by the way, circle back to questions, and allow more discussion on each question. I just want to go through the questions that people have, and then if we have time,
Certainly, please, absolutely.
anybody is free to just open the microphone and ask. So Lippy is asking, how do you associate AI with plagiarism? So I guess maybe just if you can give your general thoughts, because certainly as somebody who teaches writing, I'm sure you've given this a lot of thought. We have detection tools, and there's big
Yes.
controversy about whether they're useful or not, whether we should be using detection tools or not. So what do you think about writing with AI and plagiarism?
Correct. And it is a growing conversation. I believe that I often tell my students that the best AI detectors are my eyes. There is no software needed. The best AI detectors are my eyes. So I can see that something is AI generated depending on the kind of punctuations that are used, depending on the kind of vocabulary that is used. Like I said, it's a great flattening tone in terms of the homogenized American version of English. So I can see that happening. However, uh, software is becoming more and more robust to ensure that plagiarism or AI generated content is detected a little more accurately. I would recommend to check out the concept of post plagiarism. I believe a previous speaker has spoken about this on the Generative AI in Education group platform. In her lecture, she spoke about the concept of post plagiarism. And that is something which is optimized to the use of AI. The way that we interact with large language models, the way we interact with generative AI, and use it in our daily conversations, in our daily applications, and of course for academic purposes, we can see how the definition of what we know as plagiarism will start evolving. So please look into the concept of post plagiarism. You'd find that to be insightful.
Thanks. I'm just writing that in the chat.
I will drop a link if I can find something. Just give me one moment. Yeah, right here. There's a very interesting article by uh, a professor. I'm just going to drop the article in the chat.
Thank you. So,
Sarah Eaton. She
mhm,
has written about the concept of post plagiarism in the age of AI. I've dropped the link in chat if anybody is interested.
thank you. Taranish asked a question that I'm also interested in. So Taranish says, you recommended the use of AI for literature review in the context of academic research. However, in my limited experience, in almost every instance, about 5 out of 15 references and citations, the ChatGPT or Gemini throw up a complete fiction. If vetting each reference for its authenticity is going to increase my workload, why should we trust AI? I'm going to add to that because I know that, for example, Perplexity is kind of better with that, but there's still sometimes issues. I will just throw in from my limited experience, the 6 points that you raised, with most of them, I see generative AI is greatly helping my work, saving time, even sometimes helping me improve the quality of what I'm doing. My issue with, if I'm learning a new topic or if I'm doing a literature
Hmm.
review,
Hmm.
the problem is I sort of have a rule, which is if I know how to do something really well, I will use generative AI to do it. If I don't know how to
Sure.
do it very well, I'm going to be very careful. And the thing about the literature, and this is something I'm working on now with graduate students here. Aerospace engineering is very multidisciplinary, and sometimes students have to learn about planetary science and radiation belts and
Yeah.
all kinds of things
Yeah.
I never learned about. And they have been using, this is what they've been telling me, they've been using things like ChatGPT to learn these new topics. But because they are graduate students and they are expert learners at this point, they know when they actually need to now go and check and look up a paper, when they are no longer
Absolutely.
on the level of a bachelor's level knowledge. It's getting very technical, it's getting very specialized. And this is, I feel like, the point where ChatGPT and that sort of tool starts to break, when it's not something
Hmm.
that's sort of readily available on the internet. There's just a few papers about it, or it's very technical. So maybe you could
I
talk a
agree.
little bit about literature review and using generative AI and answering what Taranish has said and what your approach is.
Correct. So I want to make one thing very clear. I do not condone the use of generative AI as a means to find papers, right? That runs the risk of what Taronish said, that it almost always throws up things which are not true, right? They don't exist. Those fictitious titles, they are non-existent. It just hallucinates, and it thinks that this may be a generic title, and it throws up the title at you, and that almost always does not exist. However, uh, in that case, a human oversight is extremely important. But I get the concern as well, that it increases our burden. So why do it? I would say that our job in academia particularly, uh, with the literature review part, is still intact. It is still a human centered process where we go out and we look for literature which is relevant. We try to seek the kind of papers that have been written about the conversation that we are trying to be a part of. And then, when all of that can be put into a customized AI model, for example, I was talking to Sia Rajpurohit from OpenAI recently, and she introduced me to something called ChatGPT EDU. Right? It's a specialized version of ChatGPT with a PhD level intelligence. Right? So it is customized for institutes and universities to integrate within their curriculum, no matter if AI or not. Right? Within any discipline, it has a PhD level intelligence. It is designed in that way. So with ChatGPT EDU, if you feed it the data of the papers that you have searched for yourself, it can create the convergences and divergences of perspectives within those papers pretty effectively. The mapping of ideas can take place pretty efficiently of the papers that you have found out of your research, right? So if you want to see where a certain paper is agreeing with the other or where a certain paper is disagreeing with the other, these kinds of models can help you do that kind of mapping pretty efficiently. However, being Columbus and not having the ability to understand the context of the conversation, it can create
Nivid, are you with us? Nivid, I think it's better probably that you turn off your camera again.
yeah, sure.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. Was there any part of my answer that was not
Just the
audible?
last few
I'd be
sentences,
happy to
like the
repeat.
last 5 seconds or so.
Yeah, sure. So I was just concluding saying that AI can help us, or generative AI can help us create a mind map of the kind of convergences and divergences that exist in the existing literature that we have reviewed. But the task of overall going out and looking for connections that we need to be a part of through our research happens to be a human-centric effort still, and generative AI can do little to aid us in the early stages of going out and looking for papers.
And I would add, of course, that when we are talking about generative AI all this time, we're talking about the general purpose LLMs who are going out to the internet. And there are, of course, models that are trained on specific domains and so forth. And we've actually had a
Certainly.
couple of speakers talk about that. That's a whole different topic.
Certainly, I would recommend that we uh, we go back to some conversations that have happened in the previous lectures, where other speakers have focused on academia-centric AI, generative AI, and they are purposefully built to aid research processes in a way that maybe a general purpose AI like ChatGPT may not be so efficient to do it.
Absolutely. So we have a question from another previous speaker, from Shashi. What do you think about communication maturing cognition once cognition gives birth to communication? Please share your thoughts on hybrid intelligence, which is going to emerge in future with the coexistence of human intelligence and artificial intelligence.
This is a pretty interesting domain. I have yet to read more about this, to be very honest, but an intuitive response comes up from my understanding and my practice, which I would like to share with you. Cognition births communication, which is the principle that I began with. And communication in turn ends up augmenting cognition. It's a cyclical process. The way that I have felt it is The precise words you use to communicate your ideas ends up refining your own ideas. My, when because we live in India, one myth that is peddled around is that proficiency in English is equal to vocabulary, right? And vocabulary is equal to complex multisyllabic words. And that is a myth that keeps propelling around, right? And as a faculty of language, I often counter that in my students, where they come up to me and say, uh, we want to be better at English, teach us difficult words, teach us words which will make us look cool, because we know these complex, we want to know what recalcitrant means, and we want to know what floxinosin nihilipilification means, and all of those complex words, right? They think like that's a trade-off, where they will say a complex word and they will be patted on the back for it. But I have to reorient their understanding to help them realize that a clarity of language is supposed to communicate meaning more efficiently. If that can't be done, that heavy word has no weightage whatsoever. You are in fact impeding communication. So I often direct them to ChatGPT to or any a couple of other Perplexity, for example, is also good at it. I often direct them to general purpose generative AI to learn particular words that exist in English language, right? And they don't need to be complex words. They don't need to be multisyllabic words. For example, the difference between running and dashing and sprinting needs to be clear, right? So they are all three different acts with very minor differences, but three different words exist because they communicate different levels of intensity. So once they understand it, once they understand the applicability and the words and their contexts, they can use that particular vocabulary that they have learned to enhance the meaning that will come up in their thought the next time. So communication then ends up augmenting cognition. So today's communication ends up becoming a much more enhanced cognition for tomorrow. So they've said something, they've written something, and they've used a generic word there. I point it out, I direct them to ChatGPT to learn a more specific word. They learn it by themselves, they know the meaning, they know the applicability, they know the context. And the next time that the thought emerges in their mind, the complexity of the thought is matched by the complexity of the word that they have in their arsenal already. So that, I think, is a nice cyclical way for AI and any kind of general purpose generative stuff to end up enhancing the way we understand vocabulary and the accessibility of thoughts and emotions through language in our communication.
I will also add to what you've said, Nivid, with the method that you've presented of writing against generative AI. It's a constant cycle of reflection and metacognition.
Absolutely.
So we are thinking about what we've written. We're thinking, why did we write this? Do I like this? Do I like that? You know, what I wrote versus what the generative AI, what are the differences? What am I bringing to it? What is the generative AI bringing to it, right?
Absolutely.
That in itself certainly helps to develop one's cognition
100%.
in terms
Absolutely.
of
And
their
that is
knowledge,
something
right?
which I
Knowledge in terms
think
of writing.
ensures that we support our thinking, not substitute it.
So I have a quick people are thanking you for the helpful and insightful answers. Um, we're almost, we have a few minutes, so I have a quick request slash question. You've presented some prompts here, some instructions, some guidelines.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything you could provide? It doesn't have to be very detailed, but just some guidelines that we could maybe link in the video description so that somebody who wants to try this out with their class, based on what you presented here, whether it's writing against generative AI or, other things, because I think this is applicable beyond, the teaching of language,
I'd be very
based
happy
on
to
the
do
ideas
so.
you presented.
I would link this presentation that I've created, this slide deck, as well as some helpful resources that I have referred to prepare for the lecture and overall my entire pedagogical practice. I'll also link to a couple of my research papers if that is interesting for people. I'll collate all of those links and send them across to you, Ria, so that you can put them in the description of the video. I'll be very happy to do so. Also, in case anybody wants to have a detailed conversation about any of this, I'd just like to flash my contact slide for a moment.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
if anybody wants to write to me, reach out to me, I'll
Maybe
be
you
very
could type
happy.
this in the chat just because people
Sure
will have
thing,
to write it down. They might
sure
get a
thing,
letter
sure thing,
wrong or
sure thing,
something. They could just
sure
copy
thing, for
paste your
sure.
email or
I'll type my email ID in the chat as well. This is my personal one. This is my official
a
one.
quick question, Nivid, if you had the chance to collect and analyze any data with these methods that you've introduced, I'd be really interested to see with the writing against generative AI, like what students think about it, how it affects their learning performance or writing performance. Is there anything you can share or will be able to share in the future that you're working
I
on?
am writing a paper on it at the moment,
Oh, great.
and it will be prepared by January end. There's a conference that I'm presenting it at, an international conference where I'm presenting it at in January end. So after that, the paper will be ready, and once it is out in the public, I'll be happy to share that with you.
Okay, great stuff. So Nivid put his personal as well as his work email address in the chat. Um, any other questions or comments? Feel free to use the microphone, everyone, or just drop in the chat. I think we could talk for a very long time, but I'd like to give other people the chance also. Um, okay, so I guess, Nivid, we just have a minute or two left. Are there any sort of, take-home message, anything you'd like to share with people to do with, generative AI, how you see it in general, what people should be doing or looking for?
Okay, I think at the end, I was first a little hostile to it, to be very honest, right? The first idea that came to my mind is, oh, I am primarily a writer. This thing can write. My job is gone. That's the first threat perception that came in my mind. But I think the key virtue that all of us can cultivate with generative AI is patience. To wait it out, to see the kind of development that is brought in, to see the implications that exist in learning, in education, and in communication. I'm limiting it to these because they are my area of work. But within every other domain as well, with new advent in technology, we often have the instinct of jumping straight to a judgment, jumping straight to a conclusion. Tinker, tinker with curiosity. And I think that within a good half a decade or so, we'd have a clearer picture. We'll have policies in place. We'll have guardrails in place. We'll have a structured approach to deal with generative AI as a regular part of our life within the next half a decade. That is what my instinct says. I am teaching AI students at the moment in my college who are pretty passionate. So the next generation of tech students uh, are ready to leapfrog this in the future. So here's to hoping for the best. Thank you so much.